Osio Nagad. I am Feather Smith. I'm the Cherokee Nation Ethnobiology Manager with our Secretary of Natural Resources Office. We are going to start talking about the Cherokee Nation Seed Bank soon. Um, but we came out here today, I will admit, most of the time when I do these talks, we have a PowerPoint presentation. So we're not going to have any visuals today. We'll just be here kind of talking about Cherokee Nation heirloom crop seeds a little bit. And I'm also here doing plant tours. We had one plant tour at 11 a.m. and we'll have one more this afternoon at 1:30 p.m. Over along the creek bank. So if anybody's also interested in walking through and just kind of seeing some of the plants on these grounds, we'll be doing that again at 1:30. So the Cherokee Nation Seed Bank started in 2006, or I guess we started growing in 2006, and it was really an initiative to conserve Cherokee Nation heirloom crop seeds. Originally, the conversations really started about the Cherokee purple tomato, and the idea was that they wanted to see the Cherokee purple tomato conserved. But what we kind of knew at the time, we went ahead and did some research on it, is that the Cherokee purple tomato is not a true Cherokee heirloom crop seed. It is not something that was really cultivated by the Cherokee tribe as a whole. However, we did have a lot of seeds that were unique to us, that we got to looking for at that point and started, the tribe really wanted to bring those seeds and had wanted to see those seeds conserved. And what we got to figuring out was that there weren't any Cherokee heirloom crops here within the Cherokee Nation. And so it became an effort of the tribe at that point to start tracking down Cherokee heirloom crops from wherever we could find them. We worked with the Eastern Band of Cherokees. We worked with some different educational institutions, until we were able to round up about 9 heirloom crops that we then brought back to the Cherokee Nation and started growing in an effort to really conserve those seeds and have them here. Initially, we just wanted to kind of get our hands on them and bring them back to the Cherokee Nation. But the next thing that we realized is that since none of the seeds were really being grown for the purposes of genetic conservation, that really became our focus. We needed to start bringing the seeds in, growing them, to try to get them back up to looking the way that they were really supposed to look. For example, our Cherokee white eagle corn didn't have any white eagles flying on the side of the kernels. So we started growing seeds at that point in an effort to make sure that they were truly being conserved and growing in a way, that they really looked the way that they were supposed to look, that they were holding all of the characteristics that our ancestors had originally cultivated them for. Once the growing of those heirloom crop seeds was on the way, all we were really focused on was genetic conservation. And so we got a hold of the seeds, started growing them in the Cherokee Nation heirloom gardens, and we were holding back genetic stock, just for us to be able to grow in the future. And what we got to realizing is that we kind of just needed a small amount of genetics to really be able to grow seeds for the future, and that we were coming up with all this excess seed. So we had buckets and buckets of excess seed that nobody was really quite sure what to do with. So Pat Gwynn, who was sort of instrumental in getting this whole program started, actually looked around and said, we should take these excess seeds and give them back out to the community. Because these are Cherokee seeds, they naturally, rightfully belong in the hands of Cherokees. It's not something that any one entity or any one person owns or holds on to. So we should give these back out to the community for free. And that's really what the Cherokee Nation Seed Bank was born out of. It was almost this accidental program that came just from doing genetic conservation. If anybody would like to have a seat, you can also go ahead and feel free to have a seat. You don't need to stand in the back. But we were really just kind of focused on growing them for genetic conservation. And so the seed bank started, and for the first few years, I think the first year that we distributed seeds was around 2008 or 2009 to the community. And they were really, the staff was calling out different schools, different community groups, just practically begging people to take seeds. So it was a pretty small endeavor, and I think that first year they gave out, maybe 1,000 packages of seed or something like that. From that point, we have grown every year. We grow more and more packages of seed each year. Now we distribute somewhere between 8 to 10,000 packets of seed each year, filling about 4,000 to 5,000 orders every year, and we're still trying to expand. It's become a wildly, wildly popular program. Um, Even we have kind of been shocked at how popular it has really grown to be. And so last year when we gave out seeds, we had started using an inventory-based program, and we've always been able to kind of keep the seed bank applications open for a few weeks. And so last year was the very first time that whenever we opened the applications and started accepting seed requests, that we ran out of seeds in 3 hours. It was completely shocking to all of us, and at that point, we really wanted to start looking at how we could advance and grow the program. So this year we moved to a draw system. So I've talked to a few people today who had received seeds from us or applied for seeds through us this year. But if you've never applied for Cherokee Seeds, we take applications through the Gourds portal. This year we started accepting applications around February 18th, and we closed the application process on March 4th. And we did a random draw style system this year. And part of the reason that we did that was to try to give everybody an equal chance of getting their name in for seeds. We have some people who are either unavailable whenever applications open up because they're working, or they're not in the same time zones, or they're having technical difficulties. And that can really slow people down on being able to get their order in when we're doing a first come, first served system. So what we decided to do was allow everybody who was interested to get their name in those 2 weeks, and then we did a random draw. We had 13,000 people, over 13,000 people apply this year. We were able to fill 4,200 orders so far. We might still draw about another 100 or so names before we'll be completely out of seats for this year. So we haven't completely drawn all names, but we're very, very close to finishing. And we're hoping to really expand this in the future. So we do want to grow more seeds this year. We have a larger site. The Cherokee Nation Heirloom Garden Native Plant Site, if nobody's ever seen it, if you haven't gotten to come out and do a tour, we sit just east of the Cherokee Nation complex. And that site, which is about a 2 to 3 acre site, is where we grow about 80% of the Cherokee Nation heirloom crop seeds every single year. We have been able to expand that site. We have some very, very large raised beds that we're going to be able to grow more on. And so we're hoping that this year we'll be able to grow more heirloom crops on that site. We're also trying to add a garden in at our offices, because our offices no longer sit at the Cherokee Nation complex. And the really nice thing about that for us, even though it puts us further away from the garden, is that we're far enough away that we don't have to worry about cross-pollination issues. So we're going to try to start a new garden at our offices this year where we can grow some different heirloom crops. And then we have a third site, which is a contract site, which might be the last year, that is also growing Cherokee heirloom crops for us. So we just kind of hope that every year we can expand a little bit and be able to offer more demand, because the program has really become so popular. We really want to make it where hopefully every Cherokee who's interested in getting a hold of seeds each year will be able to. Also, I'm sure many people have probably heard about the Harvesting Our Heritage program, but that was a new initiative that we started this year. So Cherokee community organizations were able to request to be a part of this program. And what we've done with them is that we filled their request first, and since they are a organizational group with a garden plot that they can grow at, we wanted to be able to get them seeds that were some of the best of the best. It's the same type of genetic stock that we use at the heirloom garden, and they got larger packets of seed than like an individual would get. They were also able to get several varieties, so they were able to get one variety of each of the three sisters, and then maybe also things like corn and native tobacco and gourds as well. And the hope in that is that as these organizational groups grow their own gardens, that we'll be able to help as a resource and help them learn how to harvest those seeds, preserve, dry out those seeds, and store those seeds for the long term, and then they can actually start providing seed from their stock back out to the citizens within their communities, which will help take some of the demand off of the seed bank, but also something that we know is, for a lot of our organizations, they aren't located here in northeastern Oklahoma. They're not located here on the reservation. And so if we have an organization that's growing somewhere like down in Texas or out in California, the seeds that they grow in areas over time are going to adapt to those areas. So if they continue to take these seeds, they keep their own stock, and they grow that seed out over time, those seeds become more hardy for those areas, and they're going to be more successful for the communities in those areas. So again, it'll kind of help take some of the demand off of us, but it teaches each of our communities to be a little bit more sovereign in their own right. And it's really that kind of idea of community, the idea of gadugi, and that the community is working together to conserve those seeds, which was always sort of our hope with the program as well. So we're hoping that the Harvesting Our Heritage program will be successful and really lead to some of our organizations becoming a little bit more independent with their seed conservation. Does anybody have any questions over the seed bank so far? Anything specific that anyone wonders about the seed bank? So I will say, I did have a question earlier. Somebody had been talking about the Three Sisters. Of course, the Three Sisters are corn, beans, and squash. They're referred to the Three Sisters because those crops really grow well together. So the idea in that Three Sisters is that we would plant our corn first. We're going to let it get a little bit of size and height to it before we would then plant the beans around the base of that corn. Beans are great at fixing nitrogen out of the air into the soil. So beans will put a lot of nitrogen into the soil, and corn really likes to eat a lot of nitrogen. So they work well together for that reason. Also, all of our beans are pole beans. They need something to grow up. As a pole bean grows up that corn, it's going to add some structure to that stalk, and it's going to be stronger. It's going to be less likely to get blown over. In the Three Sisters method, the squash, the pumpkin, and the gourds can all kind of act in the same way. They would be planted further out, sort of away from the corn and the beans, and they're not so much, they're still vines, and they're going to branch out across the ground, but what they're really great at is they have very large leaves that shade out the ground, so they're going to help with moisture retention, and they're going to cut down on the amount of weeding that we're going to have to do. For Cherokee purposes, we have a much longer history, a much closer relationship with corn and beans, but squash, pumpkins, and gourds were all very important for us too. Native tobacco, if you've never grown, native tobacco is actually about 9 to 10 times stronger in nicotine content than that of smoking tobacco. So what we grow is Nicotiana rustica, which is native tobacco. Smoking tobacco is Nicotiana tabacum. And like I said, smoking tobacco, that's your recreational tobacco. For Cherokees, tobacco is sacred. It's actually one of our 7 sacred plants. And so for that reason, it would be seen kind of taboo to use tobacco recreationally. That is not how we were meant to use tobacco. It's a sacred plant. It's meant to be used for medicinal, ceremonial purposes. With that said, we oftentimes have a lot of citizens who ask, is this plant worth growing? We want to make sure that we're showing respect to it, but if they really aren't using it as much ceremonially, is it still worth growing in a garden? And again, as long as it's not being used for smoking recreationally, it's always a smart thing to have around. Tobacco is a great attractor of pollinators. So if you like butterflies, if you like hummingbirds, tobacco will bring the pollinators to your garden. It does act as a natural pesticide, so it will help with pests around the garden. The tomato hornworm is technically a tobacco hornworm, so if you like to grow tomatoes, in most cases, since tobacco is the true host plant, it will bring the hornworms away from your tomatoes. Generally, they won't hurt your tobacco plant too much since that is the host plant. Tobacco does attract its own pests, such as the hornworms. You know, there are certain aphids and things that really like tobacco, but it is a good natural pesticide. Also, again, hummingbirds love it. We get hummingbirds at the Cherokee Nation Heirloom Garden and Native Plant Site every year. We have a lot of plants out there that they're attracted to. We grow trumpet vines, we grow jewelweed, all kinds of things. But usually the hummingbirds don't bother showing up to the site until our tobacco is blooming. Until they can get a nicotine fix, they don't even bother coming out. But they are, because they have a bell-shaped flower, they're really, really a good plant for all those pollinator gardens. Any questions over the seed bank? So we will open again next year. We kind of keep looking. We sort of adjust our system every year depending on demand. In the past, we always worked as a first-come, first-served system. Eventually, we had to move to an inventory-based system as it started becoming more popular. And this year was our first year for doing a random draw. It was pretty successful this year. I say successful. We had a lot of people apply, and it's given us a chance on being able to see sort of what the demand is and how many citizens are really interested in getting a hold of Cherokee seeds. And so we will probably do a random draw style system again in 2026. Again, we're hoping that we'll have more heirloom crop seeds to offer in 2026, assuming that we have a good growth season this year. So all of the seeds that we provide through the seed bank each year are what we are able to grow in that previous year. So what we grow this year in the summer of 2025 and are able to harvest this fall, that is what we're going to distribute mostly throughout 2026. Some things are on a year's lag because the gourds that we distribute next year were actually grown in 2024. We have to give gourds a full year to dry out before we can harvest their seeds. But we are hoping that we'll have some more seed available, but we will probably work as a draw style system again next year. We're thinking that we're going to try to go ahead and open our application process kind of early in January and then close it in February. We would like to have our application process open for a full month so that way we can really allow every citizen who's interested in applying, give everybody a chance to apply, and then be able to start doing draws and mailing out seeds in February. We like to get our seeds mailed out as quickly as possible. We're a little bit behind this year. It did take us a few weeks, and so we were still mailing out seeds just as recent as this previous week, but we have all of the current orders mailed out at this point. Like I said, we may still do a few more, but most of the time we like to have things mailed out in about March so that they'll be ready. Cherokee heirloom crops, so things like our corn, our beans, and our squash, our tobacco, they're all warm weather loving crops. So most people think that, of course, this is about the time of year where you want to start planting your seeds, but all of our heirloom crops like a 4-inch soil temperature, so if you dig down into the dirt and take the temperature, about 4 inches, they want that temperature to be about 65 degrees. We don't hit that until about 2 weeks after the last frost, but we also have to know that we're not going to hit another frost. And days like this, so anytime when it's kind of cool, if we've already planted our seeds in the ground and they're trying to germinate, they don't do well on cool days. They really, really like warm temperatures. So most people think that they want to plant their heirloom crops early in April, and the vast majority of time, our heirloom crops don't like our April temperatures, at least here on the reservation here in northeastern Oklahoma. Most of the time, we're planting our corn in May. We've had years where it's been as late as June 15th before it'll germinate. Beans can usually take a little bit of a cooler temperature. They actually prefer a slightly cooler temperature. And so sometimes late April we can start planting beans, but even for beans, we're usually planting those earlier in May. We're planting our corn mid to late May, depending on how the year goes. And that's the same for the squash and the pumpkins. And that is one, we get a lot of questions on whether or not we grow in the Three Sisters method at the Cherokee Nation heirloom site. We do not, and that's the reason why. Kind of remembering that, when we were cultivating these seeds, these are all seeds that the Cherokees were growing prior to European contact and definitely prior to removal. So we were really cultivating these, in the 1600s or before, in the southeastern parts of the United States, the Carolinas, the Virginias, Alabama, Kentucky. By the time that we had moved here to Oklahoma, we already had these seeds established. And so they don't grow here quite like they do grow in the southeast. And so what that does mean for us is that most of the time we're planting our beans before we're planting our corn. And if you're growing in that Three Sisters method, that doesn't work. Your beans will drag your corn down. You could probably transplant at some later point, but it's kind of a tough thing to do here, especially with as hot as our summers get. So we don't grow in that Three Sisters method, even though we all have them in the same site. We do rotate our crops, so that does, again, help with, like, beans will fix nitrogen in soil in one area one year, and then they can fix it in another area a different year. But it's just too hot. Something to keep in mind, beans do really, really well up to the high 80s. Once we get about 93 degrees, they stop pollinating. So oftentimes what we experience is that we plant our beans in April, May. We'll have beautiful plants. We'll start to get some flowering. If we get lucky and it doesn't get too hot too fast, we'll get a small spring, early summer crop. But most of the time here, it gets so hot so quickly that we don't get much of a spring summer crop, and we're trying to keep our beans alive throughout the summertime, and then we're getting our best crop in the fall time, which again is kind of unexpected for what most people think. In the case, which I think I've had in the 10 years I've been growing with the heirloom, with the seed bank, I think we've had it happen twice that we've gotten a really good early summer crop. And in that case, at that point, the beans have done all their work. They've produced their flowers, they've produced their fruit. And by the time that they get into the heat of the summer, they start dying off because they've already done all their work. You can replant them, though, in about July and still get a decent fall crop if you want to try to do both, early summer and then a fall crop. Corn, we're usually going to be harvesting in July. Corn is one of those things, July, August. Corn is one of the crops that, when you hear Cherokees refer to Selu, we oftentimes talk about her being mother corn. And you don't really hear that with our other crops. You don't hear about mother beans. You don't hear about mother squash. And it's because corn is so reliable. If you're going to be growing a crop for survival purposes, if this is the food that's going to get you through the wintertime, the crop that's going to be the most important is the crop that's going to take care of you every single year. And in most cases, that's going to be corn. No matter how bad a year is for us, we can always rely on corn to give us a really good crop through the summertime, until we end up with summers like we'd had last summer. Last summer, we still got a harvest off of all of the corn that we grew, but most of our corn growers, we all experienced the same thing. Once temperatures for corn get, I think it's up to 102 degrees, we start losing 10% of pollination on that corn. And for every degree that we increase above 102, we lose another 10% of pollination. So I don't know how many of you remember how last summer went, but it got very, very hot very, very quickly. And we were staying around 110 or higher for a couple of weeks at a time. And it worked out that in most cases, as our corn was pollinating and actually trying to produce corn kernels, that it was just getting too hot. And so what we really saw last year when we harvested our corn is it was kind of sad looking, and it was because we had very poor pollination rates because it was getting too hot when the corn was trying to do its thing. And so sometimes we run into that. I mean, there can be struggles with gardening, and there can be struggles with gardening here. I don't know how many of you got to hear this earlier, but I have a degree in fish and wildlife biology, so I did not go to school to work for plants. I really went to school to work with wildlife, and was kind of doing something similar to what Philip and our land management people do now. And after I had gotten my degree, it was one of the women that I knew who was a part of our medicine keepers group came to me, and she said, "Feather, I know that you have your degree in biology, and you might reach out to Pat Gwynn and talk to Pat about getting hired on, because whoever gets hired on this position, we'll be working with them quite a bit, and I think you would be good for the job." And so I started talking with Pat, and Pat was immediately kind of unsure because I was a young 20-something kid, and he wasn't sure if I could do the job. We talked off and on for about 6 to 7 months before I came on, and I had no plant experience. Very little with native plants. I had no gardening experience, which is kind of why Pat was unsure about me. And about a year after I got hired on, his favorite thing to say anytime that we were out in a setting like this is, "She's really smart, but she knows nothing." And it was pretty true in the fact that I really knew very, very little about gardening and native plants in general, and I've had to learn almost everything on the job. And so when it came to gardening, I really mentored under Pat for years. So Pat Gwynn retired from Cherokee Nation here just about 2 years ago. Well, I guess it was about a year and a half ago. So last year was my first year growing through the heirloom garden completely by myself with no input from Pat. And when our corn did not pollinate well, I kind of panicked and was like going, of course, the first year Pat's gone. But Pat is still on contract with us, and so he was growing corn on his personal property for us as well. And we had the exact same issues. And again, it just came down to temperatures. Almost everybody that I talked to last summer who was growing corn kind of had similar growth rates because we just had such a hot summer. So we're hoping that the summers will be a little bit kinder to us this year, and that if it's going to get really hot, it waits until at least pollination is over. Now, squash and pumpkins, if you've ever grown the Georgia Candy Roaster squash, which is by far our most popular seed through the Cherokee Nation Seed Bank every single year. The Georgia Candy Roaster squash is a very large winter squash. They can get up to about 2 feet long. They can weigh up to 20 pounds. They're very sweet. People love Georgia Candy Roaster, but it can be incredibly difficult to grow, and it hates Oklahoma heat. Again, this was a squash that was cultivated for the southeast, so It does well up until it gets about 95 degrees, and then it starts getting heat stressed. We also have an issue that here, when the cucumber beetle feeds on squash plants, it carries a bacteria in its gut, and when it feeds on those plants, it puts that bacteria into the plant, and it causes the plant to wilt. And in the case of our particular Georgia candy roaster squash that had never been exposed to this because it's an invasive species, it was detrimental and it was killing our plants pretty quickly. We had a tough time, and Pat talked with a few different experts on gardening, and they just kept saying grow a different type of squash because a lot of the more modern squash varieties, they still are affected by the wilt, but it doesn't kill them off. And of course, we're growing Cherokee heirloom crops, so it wasn't an option to grow a different type of squash. So we kept growing the squash every year. And what we started finding is that, again, as I mentioned earlier, it started to grow a little bit of resistance to the wilt. But it was really the heat that was killing it off because the wilt would stress the plant, but then when our temperatures would get up to about 95 degrees in the afternoon, that combined with the heat, they couldn't handle it and it would just kill the plant. We also find that the heat by itself, even if the wilt is not introduced into the plant, will cause a little bit of wilt on the plants. So the combination of the two was just absolutely detrimental, and they were just dying in a matter of hours. At first, when it first started happening, the team really wasn't sure. They kind of thought maybe it was a pest or it was a vandalism issue. It took us a few months of research to figure out what was going on. And so if you've ever grown Georgia candy roaster squash here in Oklahoma, you realize that it can kind of be a tough thing to grow. Vine borers absolutely wreak havoc on us every single year, and we're always fighting the vine borers on Georgia candy roasters. So we baby that one a lot. I actually water it in the afternoons to cool it down because it oftentimes gets too hot, and when we get above 90 degrees, so that just kind of helps to cool the plants down. But Cherokee tan pumpkins are our newest heirloom crop variety. We've been growing them since about 2021, and they are a much tougher cucurbit than our squash is. The Cherokee tan pumpkin handles the heat better. It resists pests better. We don't have any wilt problems with that. And bang for their buck, one pumpkin plant will produce probably double the amount of fruits as a squash plant, and one pumpkin fruit will produce about 3 to 4 times the amount of seed versus a single squash fruit. So it's kind of become one of my favorites. The pumpkins are very small themselves. They only tend to get about 8 to 10 inches in diameter, so they're small pumpkins. They are kind of a light, kind of a khaki to orange color. And very tasty. They're actually sweeter than Georgia candy roaster squash. So when we talk about Georgia candy roaster, we say that any recipe that would call for pumpkins, sweet potatoes, or squash, you can use it for because it's a sweet squash. The pumpkins are even sweeter. If they're allowed to completely ripen on the vine, you can make a pumpkin puree out of Cherokee tan pumpkins, and you would think that you already added sugar to it. So they're great for pumpkin pies. They're great for desserts. Very easy to puree. You'll see I push the pumpkins a lot because they're so much easier for me to grow. Pumpkin has saved me a few times. So I've become pretty fond of that one. Any questions or anything so far? I will warn, if you've never grown the Cherokee tan pumpkin or the Georgia candy roaster squash, so when we grow Georgia candy roaster, we know to harvest the fruit whenever the stem starts to die back. So we'll watch it in the summertime. It gets a bright kind of an orange peachy color, and then we'll start watching the stem on that, and as that stem turns brown, it's ready to be harvested. You want to wait till the stem turns brown because we really want to keep the fruit on the vine as long as possible to get good seed. Once it gets an orange peach color, it's going to have good flavor and you're going to have a good plant to eat or a good squash to eat. But if it's not allowed to stay on the vine long enough, you may have a good squash to eat, but when you cut it open, you don't have any good seed in it. And for us, obviously, we're very concerned with good seeds. Now, with Cherokee tan pumpkin, the very first year that we grew pumpkins, Pat and I were both watching it, and Pat was going, "How do we know when to harvest these?" And I'm going, "I don't know, you're the expert." And so we assumed it was going to be the same thing with the squash, and we started waiting until the stem would die back on the pumpkin to cut them off. And we quickly found out that was not smart, and that was waiting too long. You don't want to let pumpkins get overripe. When a pumpkin gets overripe, I don't know if anybody's ever heard about exploding pumpkins, but when a pumpkin goes bad, it splits down one side, cuts open, and it spits all of the gut and the seed and everything inside. It spits them out and it just kind of explodes everywhere. And we got to find this out in the best way possible. We actually had a pumpkin fall off of a vine and took it back to the office. I mean, we're filling it. It looks like a good pumpkin. It feels like a solid pumpkin. So we took it back to the office and we put it on the dry racks and let it sit for about a week, checking it regularly. It all looks good. One weekend, we're gone for the weekend, and when we came back in Monday morning, you could smell it immediately as we walked into the offices. And we go walking in, and sure enough, the thing was sitting on one side of the shelf, but the back side of it opened up, and it had just exploded all over the wall behind the shelf. Fortunately, Pat Gwen cleaned that one up. But we started having a lot of pumpkins exploding around the garden that year because we just weren't harvesting them soon enough. Not last year, I guess in 2024, we harvested them too soon and we weren't getting perfectly ripened pumpkins and they didn't have their great taste. This year, I think we finally have it down to an art maybe. So they're much easier to grow and they handle Oklahoma heat a lot better. Gourds are another good thing to grow, but gourds are all utilitarians. So where pumpkins and squash are for eating, gourds are going to be for artwork, they're going to be for bird houses, water dippers, that sort of thing. Gourds are sort of funny in that they are native to the Old World. They're sort of native to the Mediterranean region, but they predate all European contact here in North America. They even predate the Viking contact here in North America. So nobody's really quite sure how they found their way to North America. We've been growing them for a long time, but most of the varieties that we grow are not native, unless we're talking the buffalo gourds. Buffalo gourds are one of the few seeds that we distribute through the seed bank that is native to Oklahoma, but it is not native to the southeast. You'll tend to find buffalo gourds growing naturally around here a lot, and they're small, about the size of a baseball or a tennis ball, depending on what area they come from. All right, any questions over anything? So far, that would mean that you haven't made the list. So we did take applications this year from February 18th to March 4th. We've drawn out about 4,200 names so far. And I initially thought we were actually shorter on seeds this year than we were last year. I think we're going to have about the same amount. And so I think we'll be able to draw another 100 to 200 names this next week. After this next week, we'll be completely out and we'll be done. But I would go ahead and keep watching your email this week, and there's still a chance that you might get drawn out. And then, like I said, after this week, we'll be done. We did have over 13,000 applications come in. All right, any other questions? Okay. Well, don't everybody. I will be around here if anybody has any questions about the Cherokee Nation Seed Bank. We will also have one more plant tour, which will be starting just kind of over this way along the creek bank, where we'll talk about some of the native plants that are growing out here on this site, because this is really, really a great site. The waterways around here are sort of pristine, and so it makes the perfect site for a lot of really cool plants. So if anybody's interested in coming out for a plant tour, or even just talking to me about the seed bank, I will be around here for any questions. Well, don't.